Today I want to share with you the 5 mistakes I made when I started beekeeping, the impact that those mistakes had, and what I would do differently today. Before I start, it's important for you to note that I'm working with the Apis mellifera scutellata in South Africa, known as the African honeybee. It's found in central, southern and eastern Africa, and it also constitutes part of the ancestry of the killer bee that's spreading through North and South America. So some of the mistakes that I'll be sharing with you today and how I've dealt with them may be different for some of my friendly viewers that I have in other parts of the world. So let's get into it. Mistake number 1 was swarm attraction. And when I first did my beekeeping course, I so desperately wanted a swarm as quickly as possible. I went out, I bought a little catch box, and I got a lure, and I put the lure inside the catch box. Then after a couple of days, I still didn't have any bees and I was getting impatient, and I decided, well, let me have a look and see what other people recommend. And the recommendation was to use lemongrass essential oils, and so I took some lemongrass and put that in my hive. Subsequently, now 5 years later, this hive is still very, very empty. What I learned was that the impact of using too much lemongrass is it actually discourages the bees from occupying the box. I wouldn't recommend it. The way that I would do it now, knowing what I know, is I would go to a beekeeper that's in my area. I would ask them for some old frames and swap them some new frames for the old frames, put some old frames in the box, or alternatively even just get some wax and some propolis from them and then heat that up enough that you can rub the wax and the propolis on the inside of the hive. This will be more natural for the bees, and they'll see it as another colony being in this hive, and that then gives them the impression that this hive would be suitable for them to occupy. Mistake number 2 was opening my hives far too often. In the beginning, I was so excited that I wanted to be looking at my bees as often as I could. I didn't want my bees to be leaving and absconding or a problem to be existing, so I wanted to take care of things as quickly as I possibly could. And so I was opening my boxes fairly regularly, always just to have a look at the bees, see if I could find the queen. And the result of that is I actually stressed my bees out. They were stressed in terms of protecting their hive. Every time I went into it, they were stressed with how they had to rebuild some of the comb if I had accidentally damaged anything when I opened it. And then also I put the queen at risk because I could have accidentally squashed her in the hive with pulling frames out and putting frames back in. The impact of that was my queen actually laid less, I had weaker hives, and the honey production, if there was any at all, was very, very low. So my recommendation is that you get to know your area as quickly as possible. Try and open it as little as possible, and only open it when you know you need to. These days I track all of my hives in terms of the seasons and where they are positioned and what I know is going to be in flower in those areas, and then I work my maintenance according to understanding when there's going to be a flow, making sure that there's enough space for the queen to lay and that they're not going to swarm, and then also making sure that the hive is going to be strong enough for the flow or is not too weak, and maybe I need to intervene and maybe feed them. But also not doing sufficient maintenance was a problem in the beginning for me as well. I had a few hives which I had in a location that I couldn't get to regularly enough, and what happened then is the expansion of the bees led to mistake number 3 that I made, which is not supering in time. So bees naturally expand the colony, and eventually the hive will become overcrowded. This places the bees in a state of where they're going to produce a new queen, and they'll build swarm cells. The old queen will see these new queen cells being built, and she'll gather as many of the workforce together and she will swarm, and there goes half the colony from that hive. The impact of that is that you have a much weaker colony. It's going to take time for them to get up to speed again for honey production, and the product that they produced essentially was another swarm. So what you want to be doing is you want to be getting into your box often enough to know what that expansion looks like. We use 10 frame boxes here in South Africa, and I look in that brood box, and if I've got 8 frames of brood or 8 frames of bees across that brood box, then I put a super on that, and I will potentially also take the 2 outside frames out and put 2 emptier frames close to the center of that box, so that there's space there, they know they can build new comb on that, and it'll be new comb for the queen to lay in. And then I put that super on, and I go ahead and close that box up in the hope that they're going to take whatever honey they produce into that super, leaving the whole bottom box for brood only. When I got my first beekeeping kit and my hive and everything, I got a queen excluder with it. I have a few of these queen excluders now because some of them have been donated to me. And so my first hive, I put my queen excluder on, and I use that to obviously make sure that my queen doesn't go into my supers. Now, since then I've learned that that queen excluder actually restricts the bees quite a lot in terms of going up into the supers, and your honey production is going to be a lot lower, and the queen is now restricted to your brood box, which essentially creates the opportunity again for them to swarm because you've restricted her. The space is less, it's still the single brood box. So what I've done since then is I've taken these queen excluders, thrown them away. Well, not really. I use them now to keep the wax moth out of my supers because I like airflow coming through my supers. I no longer use them to keep my queen out of the super. Occasionally, and it's not very often, I find that she has laid in my super, but more often than not, my supers are full of honey and my queen is laying in the brood box below. As long as I've given her the space down there, she's happy. Mistake number 5 is in my first harvest, when I took honey out of my hives, I stored my super frames filled with honey in a plastic tart, and I was waiting to figure out where I was going to spin out this honey because I didn't have a spinner at the time, and I was speaking to a few beekeepers, but I was in no hurry because I thought maybe that honey is going to be safe in that plastic tart. Little did I know that within a week I had wax moth in that tart, and it destroyed the honey that I had in there. It actually made such a mess of those super frames, and I was unable to actually get the harvest that I wanted out of those frames because I had taken too long. So what I do nowadays is when I take my supers off, I harvest the honey out of those super frames within a day or two, and I just get the honey at least into a bucket, and then the wet super frames I'm able to store in the super boxes with the queen excluders on the top and the bottom. And yes, the bees rob out whatever leftover honey is on the wet supers. The wax moth doesn't get to it because there's enough cool air running through there and there's light. Talking about wax moth, I highly suggest you have a look at this next video and you'll learn everything you need to know about wax moth and how to deal with them.